Hi, everyone, and welcome to the live Printing Impressions and Implant Impressions webinar, Workflow Optimization, Streamlining Print Production for Efficiency and Profitability, sponsored by Rico. I'm Ashley Roberts, Content Director of Printing Impressions and the host of today's event. Before we get started, I would like to bring up a quick slide about Printing United Alliance, our parent organization. We are proud to offer a variety of resources to support professionals like you. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to bring that slide, actually bring the slide up. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we are proud to offer you a variety of resources to support professionals like you, whether through training programs, certifications, or opportunities to connect with the broader printing community. Today's webinar is just one example of how we're here to help you stay informed and ahead of the industry. If you're not already a member, consider joining to take full advantage of all of the resources. For more details, you can scan the QR codes below or click the Alliance widget on your console. Additionally, let me take a second to point out the resources widget at the bottom of your console. It looks like an open book. If you missed the tech tips video we played leading up to the webinar, you can always click on this widget for more information. You can also access other resources, such as today's slides. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, feel free to give a heart or a thumbs up by using the reactions widget on your console. It looks like a smiley face. I also want to point out that we should have some time at the end of the webinar for our audience Q&A, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will try to get to them at the end for our two speakers today. So I am very pleased to be joined by two wonderful speakers, James Scuderi, Manager of Production Services at Polaris Direct, based in Hooksett, New Hampshire. Polaris Direct is a full-service letter shop and printing company specializing in high-volume direct mail processing. And also joining us today is Lisa Oakleaf, Senior Director of Global Software Product Management at Rico. So welcome, James and Lisa.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
So just to give a little format for the audience, so it'll be a panel style format today with James bringing us the print service provider perspective and Lisa providing us with the workflow expertise from the product side. So we're going to discuss file preparation, pre-flighting, workflow challenges, maintaining color consistency, bottlenecks in finishing, emerging technologies, automation. So we're going to discuss a lot today. And then once we're finished with our panel discussion, we'll move to the audience Q&A, as I mentioned before. So again, please feel free to submit questions as we go. So I think a good starting point would be to start with you, James. So could you set the stage a little bit and tell us about Polaris Direct, you know, what market you're in, just tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Polaris Direct was founded in 2003 by Joe and Judith Malloy. They're both industry experts who carry a wealth of knowledge in both sales and marketing. And Polaris, as you had mentioned, is a full-service letter shop and printing company. We specialize in high-volume direct mail campaigns for Fortune 500 businesses, and some of those clients are in the financial, healthcare, nonprofit, and some telecommunication companies, as well as a little bit of retail. We're located in Hooksett, New Hampshire, so we are, just a little bit north of Boston. We're right outside the seacoast and maybe about an hour and a half from the New Hampshire mountains. So geographically speaking, it's a great place to be, a great place to live. We have 2 high-speed inkjet presses from Screen and 3 digital toner cut sheet devices from Rico, as well as 2 roll-fed inserters from Bowie Systech and 2 high-speed roll-to-fold finishing solutions from Standard Finishing. And then a little bit about myself. I've been with Polaris for almost 12 years now. I started off in the print room as a digital print operator and worked my way into a supervisor role there. And then eventually I've now become general manager of production services. So overseeing the day-to-day operations of the letter shop, I also still provide leadership to the print room. So I oversee a lot of quality control and maintenance and scheduling, and honestly a little bit of everything in between as well. So there's always something going on here at Polaris.
Great, and I think that's a really good, overview also, because it shows, you have a variety of technology and equipment, and I'm sure we are gonna get into some, challenges with workflow. So that's great. Thank you so much. So speaking of workflow challenges and solutions, which is what we're going to get into today, I think maybe Lisa, if you could start us off here with, what are some of the biggest workflow challenges that you see that print providers are facing today?
That's an interesting question. And I would say there's some common threads. The variability depends on the applications that are being produced, the markets that are being served for those applications. But the common threads that we have heard from our customers, and based off of my background, is really around integration between disparate solutions. I was a little shocked that that was a common thread, because I thought certain types of markets, print markets, were a little bit more streamlined. But there's still, with all the acquisitions that have been going on in our industry, we end up with this kind of hodgepodge mix of solutions, and trying to figure out what to keep, what to get rid of, what to put together, how to integrate those for more of a streamlined, efficient workflow is one of the biggest challenges that we still see. We also see a lot around visibility of jobs. We're still heavily reliant on our people to provide visibility of what's going on. We don't have a clear path to track that. We've also started seeing a pattern around, obviously, data analytics, et cetera. But really what we're finding is a lot of customers don't have even a data strategy. They get the value of data, but how do they use data to drive their business in a better, positive way? That's something that we're seeing as a workflow challenge. And it's not really driven towards a specific segment of workflow. These are challenges that we've seen really throughout the whole workflow chain. And there's a lot of manual touch points in there still. And a lot of that is just something we've normalized so much of what we do day to day that we forget we're maybe not as efficient as we think we are. So it's really getting into those disparate solutions, that visibility, and having a data strategy. And then the biggest challenge, number one, is the skilled labor. As an industry, we know we have a shortage of skilled labor. We're losing our traditional knowledge as people retire or leave the industry, and it's very hard to replace that knowledge. And so we're looking for more automation, of course, and how do we handle that, and how do we make the tasks simpler so that the labor force that we do retain or that we do bring on is able to still produce at the rate and volume that we need. So that's really the challenges that we see, and that's been pretty consistent across all the different markets and different applications.
So I love how you broke that down, and we are going to get into the automation and kind of how the skilled labor challenges fits into that. But I wanted to go back to something. So you mentioned data, and some print service providers maybe not utilizing data as much as they could. Do you think that's an education, kind of an awareness thing? Like they don't realize what they can be doing, or are they hesitant about using data? Like what is the kind of gap there?
I feel like data is a bit intimidating, right? If you think about, even from a consumer perspective, at a personal level, I actually work with somebody who has a watch and a ring to get their biometrics. There's just so much data. And from a print market perspective, I feel like we're still young. We do have a lot of data, and that's been traditionally put in the form of reports where you have people aggregate things, where you go to a system and you pull some information out of it, but it's never been this holistic, clear picture. You're just kind of getting nuggets here and there. So I think that really people like that data is being given to them and presented to them, but they don't know how to get value out of it. So they're still struggling with, okay, I don't know if all the data I have is valuable. I don't know if I have the right data. And then what do I do with it when I have it? So I think it is a lack of understanding of how to get value. I think it's the intimidation factor of, I don't even know where to start. Our brains just kind of explode, because if we think about the whole picture, it's overwhelming. So I think really we're starting to see the traction drive more forward, but it's still very slow. And I think that's just a lack of knowledge, and they're looking for help.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. So, so James, I want to talk about some specific issues that maybe you've encountered. So, you know, I mentioned file preparation, that we were talking about pre-flighting. So what are some of the most common file preparation issues that you've encountered, and how can the pre-flighting process be improved?
Sure. So yeah, the common file preparation issues that we've experienced typically relate to color and or design issues, such as like a lifestyle image or how the color itself is built. Sometimes the quality of the print with lifestyle images can be a challenge, depending on the paper that you're using, or if you're converting from offset to digital. That's definitely a challenge that you got to dial in. But I would recommend engaging with the customer early on and during the design process to help guide them to find a win-win scenario where both parties can agree on a final product. Sometimes there's challenges with something such as gradients or heavy color or heavy coverage, and you want to make sure that you're using the best device possible to provide that output. So
you said something that I've definitely heard before, that sometimes print service providers, there's a kind of a frustrating point where they're not brought in at the design, in part of the design process. You know, a customer will come to them with something that they're looking for, and they haven't looped you in at that early stage.
Sure.
Do you have any advice there on how, you know, print service providers could work with their customers to make sure that they are part of that design?
Yeah, I think there's, I would definitely recommend trying to get more involved with your sales team, and definitely making sure both the marketing team with the client and the sales and everybody's just on the same page with what can be produced. And you want to make sure this is all done before marketing gets their approval on what they're really looking to push. And sometimes the, you know, your print provider can provide a solution, and sometimes marketers want to be able to have a set design that they want to go with. So it really comes down to communication and doing those steps early on. So before, you know, you're not wasting time or being able to miss any deadlines with your print.
Great, thank you for that. So as a follow-up question, are there any workflow automation tools that help manage incoming jobs more effectively?
Yes, there is. So for pre-flighting, we use Infocus, Pitstop, and Switch, which is our tool for traditional checks such as fonts and colors, and we utilize it for repairs and file cleanup. And then for postal pre-sorting, we use BCC and Quadient Inspire, used for variable data and document composition, which both have automation functionalities, but with built-in leverage that we are using for our workflow.
Lisa, I'm going to ask you to chime in here as well. You know, about workflow automation tools and how they can help more effectively manage jobs. What's your perspective here?
It's interesting because there's a lot of different solutions out there, and depends on what you want to spend, and I don't mean that necessarily in dollars. That does play into it, but also resource, right? So Switch and Pitstop are very common, especially in the commercial side. If you're more on kind of enterprise corporate side, you might look at tools like Ready PDF. But we often find there's also a difference between pre-flighting a file and optimizing a file, right? So if you think about, especially when you get into complex variable data, you're dealing with a different set of rules. You have different layers and annotations potentially in those variable files, and the optimization's removing that. So there's also homegrown. I can't believe this, but there's also the whole offset world where those systems have been bred to take in very complex layered transparencies, et cetera, and be able to take those, transform them, rip them down, rebuild them into something that's valuable. So it does depend on the situation and what the people have and what they're willing to invest in. But there's a lot of great solutions out there, and even on the color management side. It just depends on what you're used to, what your people know, and if you're losing those skills or that traditional knowledge, how do the solutions you have work with that lesser skilled people? So that might change your scope or what you're doing with your workflow.
Thank you for that insight. So James, going back to you, what challenges did you face before implementing workflow automation solutions, into Polaris?
So before implementing workflow automation solutions, there was a lot of manual and repetitive tasks that were just eating up time, right? So the best way to do that is to obviously automate as much as possible and find ways to get those tasks done quicker. So we create our output by integrating both data and client artwork to create our output. So as everything is data-driven, we have a bit more control in our file preparation process. As mentioned before, we automate pre-sorting, NCOA, and just general sign-off criteria as well. We've been able to cut down time on that, and we've seen results help with getting jobs into production faster because of that.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about the benefits and improvements. Do you have any specific examples you could share? I don't know if you do. But
yeah, sure. We also use homegrown development and custom developments here at Polaris, but we also leverage the automation functionalities within those tools to create a streamlined workflow. So we were able to cut down a lot of these processes from 2 to 4 days, even a week, down to 24 hours. In our pre-sorting and postal software window book, we can generate tray tags and pallet placards automatically. But another thing that's quite simple is just data-driven is automating our paperwork, right? Like paperwork is kind of inevitable, and sometimes you can't get away from it, right? So, being in production, we do still need physical pieces of paperwork to help get our work done. We definitely utilize our technology, but something as simple as a request form for printing is automated for through data. So again, it's just these little steps that save time have really proven themselves to, again, get things into production faster, and it gives everybody the chance to do more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sure your customers appreciate it too. If you're getting
exactly
faster and things more efficient, then
Yep, absolutely.
So Lisa, moving to you, I want to ask you what advancements have been made in job submission and management that help improve efficiency?
But it's an interesting question because we still see a lot of manual entry when it comes to the solutions, not necessarily that the solution itself doesn't have automation wrapped around it, but as far as being able to automate that solution into production. So I would say that's still a gap, but the digital and the offset sides may have different paths as well. There's portals maybe that come through offset systems or e-commerce solutions, or FTP is still being highly utilized today. Email is still one of the most current things that people receive, but we're starting to see an uptick in AI, which is really fascinating and fun to watch. The current and upcoming solutions, whether they're homegrown or out of the box, again, depends on the customer and what they're investing in that. But we're seeing solutions that can take incoming files, extract information from those files, which really isn't anything new, but marrying that with AI is allowing the AI to learn and grow, ask questions, and be able to really gather as much data about a job up front with as minimal human touches as possible, so that once that job gets into production, you have a full job ticket. You didn't have to have someone enter all of that information into a system because it came along with it. So it's kind of fun to see that evolution. I think email is still one of the biggest challenges, but we're starting to see AI in some of the submission tools, especially around e-commerce, that are able to deal with email, gather information or strip out information from the email, marry that with a print file, and then push that to a system of record. So I think we're getting closer to solving the problem around job submission. I think there's still a lot of those manual entry points where we haven't fully pushed everything together. But I anticipate that that's going to start evolving pretty quickly, especially with the adoption of AI coming into our business.
Can I ask you about AI? Because, people I've spoken with from the PSP side of things, from the OEM side of things, AI can be an incredible tool I know it's been in the printing industry for probably much longer than we've been talking about it, in different technology, with us not even, I say us as in me, not really realizing it. Same with the hesitancy that maybe you see with data. Are you seeing any hesitancy with people saying, I don't know how I feel about using something that uses AI, or are people really excited? Like, what are you hearing from people about that?
I think people are really excited. I don't think yet there's a clearly defined expectation. I think a lot of the customers are still really looking to the vendors to tell them what role AI is playing, but I think it's become an expectation. So it's moved from a buzzword to an expectation, and they're looking for the vendors to explain what they're doing. I think the challenge is everybody says that they're using AI, but we're not very clear on what that AI, what that value is to the customer. And I can tell you where we all start from a vendor perspective is internally, because we have to figure out how to do this, right? So it's more, how do we get to things faster? And I've recently had some conversations with customers where they are actually using AI to help start forms or things that they need to do. So going back to the comment that he just made around we have to have paperwork, right? There's things that have to happen in our environment that requires a physical something. They're using AI to create a template or create a starting point, because that's easier than starting from scratch on anything. And so I think it's starting to play a role from the business side for sure, especially with ChatGPT. We're all throwing stuff in there. We have Copilot now, which is at our fingertips from Microsoft. So like I said, it's moved from a buzzword to an expectation. But from a vendor perspective, we have to do a better job at articulating what that AI is doing and how that value is driven down to the customer. So I think that's kind of the next phase for us, is to make sure we have a little more clarity, because there's a lot of activities, especially around the hardware side for us, on what we're doing and how we're automating some of our known challenges to help with those lack of skills. So that's kind of where I feel we're at as an industry with AI. There's just a lot of it, and it's again, it's data. It's a bit overwhelming right now, but we're starting to see some unique cases popping up.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I know. I've definitely, it's exciting, but I have heard, the excitement and the, people wanting to understand more.
Yes.
Yeah, it's evolving so rapidly. So thank you for that. So speaking of emerging technologies and, where things are going, I'm going to stick with you, Lisa. What emerging technologies do you see shaping the future of print production workflows?
This is actually something I'm very passionate about right now. There's a lot of buzzwords happening around what I'll call factory automation, and there's a lot of discussions around robotics. And robotics is kind of a wide topic. That could be cobots, it could be AGVs, AMRs. We're not quite at the human level of autonomy, but there's a lot that happens around robotics. It's nothing new from a manufacturing perspective, but it is relatively new to our industry, I would say. There are customers that I've worked with that have been using robotics for years, but in general, we're getting a lot of people that say they're interested, they feel passionate that it is a next step for our industry. They, again, don't know where to start. And so some of the vendors are really participating with a lot of the robotics companies and trying to figure out, how do we accommodate the variability of applications that are being produced in a print environment, and how do we then help our customers to facilitate that? And bigger than that, when you think about factory automation, the concept, it's more than just robotics. It's taking all of those parts and having a backbone, if you will, that can help direct and guide, and then you can layer in AI over it. So I think over the next probably 2 to 5 years, we're going to see a lot of this happening, and how fast that goes depends on what we can focus on. But I've also seen a lot of activities around things like digital twins, So in the past, we've used those for very specific things, but now we're starting to see this expansion where digital twins are being used of, like a replica of a whole production environment. So if you think about how, as a company, if I want to make a change that will affect my production or potentially the profitability of my business, I want to be able to use something like a digital twin to figure out how that's actually going to work. And is it going to have a positive or a negative effect? So I can do these things without actually going through production. So they're kind of fun things that are going on, but really factory automation, robotics, digital twins, all of that stuff, and layer in AI, that's kind of where the emerging technologies are leading us, or the path that we're going down.
Thank you for explaining digital twins. Maybe everyone in the audience knows what that is, but I had no idea what that was. So thank you for explaining that. Sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
So James, not to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna, because we talked about robotics, is that something that you are interested in? And is it something you already have some robotics? What's your stance on
We
that?
definitely have certainly thought about it at the very least. We have some finishing lines that require little to none as far as moving product off the finishing line into a carton. And there's been times where we've considered that, but we're still looking into it for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean,
Can I add something to that too? Because I know one of the two top concerns that we always get when we have the robotics discussion, one is around price, because it has been an expensive thing in the past, but it's getting better, right? The other part is the variability. So to your point, James, when you have a repetitive task and a very set defined thing, it's easier to leverage robotics. When you have variable applications, maybe different sizes, different thicknesses, different sheets, or things you're trying to accommodate, that truly you can't just stick an arm on the end or something. That's where we're trying to figure out how best to approach that. And we actually have some IP that's going on here at Ricoh that will help. But I think we're getting there, but it's going to be interesting to see how we evolve over the next couple of years in that arena.
Sure, I can definitely see that being something that takes a little bit more time to implement into an operation such as ours. We run all sorts of work from letter packages and self-mailers, so because we're high volume, there's a lot of sorting that we need to do as well. So there might be 380 pieces in this mail tray and 275 in this next piece, but because we run so many different types of packages, as you had mentioned, Lisa, there's different thicknesses of components, different stock and SKU numbers. There's a lot of moving parts here. So, but yes, we have certainly thought about it. There's a lot of the conventions that are out there that are demonstrating robotics and how to implement it. Just because we don't currently have it doesn't mean we wouldn't want to consider it in the future. We would just need to figure out the best way to utilize that for us.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. So moving from robotics is a very exciting, topic. But I want to move to color management. And I think, James, you had mentioned it earlier, definitely an important, factor. And actually, we had just recently on Printing Impressions published an article about, 4 tips on how to manage color across different platforms. And that kind of addressed calibration and certification, but, it's important from a bigger workflow picture to understand where color management fits into that. So Lisa, I'm gonna go back to you for this. So can you talk about that and maybe what the audience should know about color management fitting into an efficient workflow, optimized workflow?
Sure, like as far as like color consistency?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so a challenge that we've definitely had was maintaining color consistency across multiple devices, right? So I mentioned we have 2 roll-fed high-speed inkjet presses, and we also have 3 digital cut sheet devices from Ricoh, right? So we do a lot of repeat, but also one-off jobs on these cut sheet devices. So the one thing that we've recommended was engaging with our supplier, right? So Ricoh actually came in and did a huge assessment on our technology and and came up with a way to help automate this process for us, but also just manage that color for us. So we had Rico come in and they got us G7 certified, which is our baseline standard for calibration. We use ORS links to generate our ICC profiles. And then we use EFI Fiery as our digital front end. So from there, we can have different presets for different jobs, different media, different papers that we're running. And it just makes, as we talked about earlier, like less touch points for operators. We want to make things as simplified for the operator as we can to provide the best output possible, because at the end of the day, that just saves time, right? So if we're running a job on one device today, next week I might run it on the other device. And due to these standards that Rico has helped us with, we've been able to manage our output because of that. And then if there's anything beyond that that still isn't matching, then that's when we look into the hardware side of things. Our Rico cut sheet devices are all toner based, so do we need to change a photo conductor drum? Is it the charge unit? Is it just a paper transfer unit? So there are different things that we look at, but through the help of Rico, we've really had some success managing color. And then screen on the high-speed inkjet side, we use Equios, which is their proprietary digital front-end software. So from there, we generate different templates, which will hold the media settings and the speed settings. As far as matching PMS colors, how we have that color built in the system. And then from there, we use a media database manager that stores all those color profiles and then different speed settings. So for example, we might have a job on 60-pound offset, and that might run at 220 meters per minute. Or you might have another client that's lower quantity but higher quality, might run that at a slower speed. So being able to have those flexibilities and options only helps us provide better quality print for our customers. And thanks to our suppliers and engaging with them, they've helped us help our customers.
Yeah, so you mentioned that Rico came in and helped you get G7 certified and everything. So can you obviously, and you also mentioned that there's been an impact on your operators. Has there been an impact, or should I say, has there been any response from customers that they've noticed that color has changed, or
I mean, we've never really seen a sincere color drift, whereas an output would be different than the last job. But by calibrating on a regular basis, we've been able to maintain color consistency. And we've had, through that help, as I mentioned earlier, we've been able to kind of just keep a baseline for these devices. We have also a Rico 7210 printer that's very stable. That one always seems to have pretty stable color consistency, so there's certain jobs we'll run on there for our customers versus our Rico 9210s. But they're pretty stable machines, and the applications team is very responsive when we need their help. And then the hardware guys, the service technicians, they're local to Polaris. So it is helpful to have a team of resources who are local, responsive, and helpful to us. And from that, we were able to educate ourselves, and from that we can educate our operators and our internal team as well as far as what the capabilities of these devices are. And at the end of the day, we're able to put out a good quality products because of that.
Great. So Lisa, I'm wondering if you could also add on to that, and from your perspective, how color management fits into that workflow process.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I feel is important, and then I will give you a little bit of history from my perspective. So before I came to Rico and I was working in the industry, I used to be G7 certified, and I know that kind of goes back to the skills challenge we may have as we lose some of those people or those resources with those skills. Customers or print shops are faced with, do we invest in another person that could potentially leave? How do we handle that? James made a good comment about the vendors like Rico, where we do have a skilled team that's all they do is color services for customers. They'll help customers get certified, or they'll help provide some of those. But I would also say environment plays a role, consistency across platforms. James mentioned that as well. You have different technologies, and how can you run one job over here and then run it over there, and does it match? And then when you get into more corporate, you're dealing with brand color. And then a little bit about my history when I was doing color management. Being in Colorado, we have like no humidity here. So we had about once a quarter or seasonally, we had some major shifts in our environment, and it was relative to the humidity changes. It impacted the stocks, it impacted everything. And so we had to readjust our profiles and our tonal curves and everything. And, you know, we even had wide format, we had offset, we had toner, we had inkjet. So we had the whole gamut. And it was hard to do. And I would say the color gamuts on the devices, the newer ones, are getting better. They support definitely a bigger color gamut, and that helps. But being able to print from one device to the next, because production is flexible, it varies. You don't know when a device is going to go down, when you have to shift work. And there's a lot of tools like X-Ray and GMG and Oris and even Ricoh. We have our Ricoh Auto Color Adjuster. There's a lot of tools out there, and customers have all this, but the skills. So remember that your vendors have skills, for one. Two, remember that it's not one and done. You do have to keep up with it. And two, and the third part for me is, if you think about color matching, I will tell you, in many of the shops that I worked at, we had a sample, and the customer said, I want to order another X amount of this type of product. I want you to match the color. And we could never do it. Toner's harder, inkjet's more stable, offset, of course, but it's always a challenge. So we have solutions now in the market, especially with our own, but where we can measure a sample, create a profile from that, plug it into any device, and then get the intended output. It does help remove some of that skill challenge. It helps remove some of the tension that you know you're going to face trying to match that. I think technology's come a long way, but color is a huge value to our businesses, especially when we have all these different technologies and we know they're going to shift, and we know we're going to be running things on different things at different times, and environments are always a challenge. So that's my 2 cents about color, but it's a very important topic, and I think there's a lot of great technology out there to support, and a lot of resources that we just often forget may exist out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ricoh was very helpful for Polaris, for sure. They made it easy for us, and you know, as we mentioned earlier, we've been open since 2003, and we've always primarily been a roll-to-roll print shop. So when we migrated over to digital cut sheet, that wasn't until 2020, and we use that as an opportunity to get our toes wet and kind of figure out how to utilize these devices and what sort of work would run best on them. And now we're primarily using our Ricoh devices for self-mailers and postcards and smaller volume letter packages. But again, I just want to reiterate that engaging with your supplier was definitely our best result in being successful.
Great tip, thank you. So I do just mention we're doing great. We have lots of questions coming in from the audience members, and I want to make sure we get to some of that. So I'm gonna maybe jump around a little bit. I do want to touch on bottlenecks in finishing. So James, love to get your perspective on this. You did mention, some of your finishing processes. So have you ever had any situations in the past or currently where there have been bottlenecks in your finishing? And if so, what did you do to solve that?
So I think it's pretty safe to say that we currently do not have any bottlenecks here, but that's not to say we haven't learned from the past. So maybe 5+ years ago, we definitely had some challenges in our what we call the traditional bindery area, where it's a little bit slower than the high-speed equipment we have now. But in the past, we'd run, roll to roll, and then we'd deliver a roll to the bindery area, and then we'd have to, cut and fold that product and then bring it over to the inserter. Whereas now we do have 2 roll-fed inserters, as well as 2 high-speed roll-to-fold lines of standard finishing. But now with the lack of, without having this bottleneck, we now can focus our attention on the things such as printing and inserting. And as a production manager, I'm focusing less time on the traditional bindery areas, and I can focus more on the finishing of the actual product itself. So to say there's bottlenecks now, I really wouldn't say so. In the past, to kind of comment a little bit on that is managing time and scheduling time for proofs and color proofs has been a challenge before. You want to make sure your proof is matching the output in the production that you're going to be writing for your client. You might run a proof on a Monday, but it might not be the following Monday where you go live for print. So being able to schedule that downtime and making sure you're matching your product is important. And really just comes down to just proper scheduling to get that done.
Lisa, do you have perspective on that you've seen any PSPs who have had these bottlenecks and how they've kind of addressed it?
Yeah, I think from a finishing perspective, and this probably expands beyond finishing, but you have three facets. You have equipment, you have people, and you have process. And generally what we see probably first and foremost is process. If you're basically bottlenecking work in a rush cycle through, and you have challenges up front, when it gets to the finishing department, it's always a hot mess. If you have aging equipment and you have specific operators that are the only ones that can set up that equipment, then you're relegated to when they're there. So you may have stuff happen and they're not there, and then you're in a bind. And then there's the equipment itself. So the aging equipment is just iron, it runs, and people run them until they can't run them anymore. And in those cases, we're not benefiting from automation, we're relying on people. So we have this perfect storm going on right now. And I always tell customers the first thing is always to look at the process, see how your work's being fed down into your finishing department, and how does that impact it? And is there anything you can do to streamline that up front so that when it gets to finishing, it's a little bit easier to digest? And then make sure, as James mentioned, scheduling, make sure that your work is scheduled around the right resources. And then from an investment perspective, it comes down to ROI. So if you're thinking about investing in new equipment, which is always a good thing, you just have to figure out how do you get your ROI and when, and is that something that your business can sustain? Because the end result of that is more automation, more data collection, more automation, more, your operators don't have to do anything other than push a button sort of thing. So it does hit your bottom line, both from a time perspective, resources, but it does have a higher cost up front. So those are all triggers that you have to figure out. But process is the easiest to start with because it doesn't hurt you.
So perfect segue, because I'd also like to, we promised we'd touch more on automation. So James, I'm going to move to you for this. Do you see any opportunities to integrate new technology that could help enhance automation, reduce touch points? Do you see that? Or have you recently invested in any of that?
Sure, yeah. So I certainly think that the next move for integrating into newer technologies to enhance the automation process would be to, as Lisa mentioned earlier, opportunities for AI, right? And what does that mean for players? So I see that as an opportunity to find tools for predictive maintenance. Over the years, we've been able to improve our maintenance schedules and scheduling downtime to do maintenance. We've really leveraged our operators in the print room to do a lot more self-maintenance than calling in screen to do it for us. So now we really just try to call them in for break fixes versus a PM. On our high-speed folding lines, their operators themselves, they do all the maintenance there, and very rarely am I placing a service call unless it's something that came out of the blue. And that also goes for our roll-fed inserters as well. We've been told that we're one of the highest top customers for self-maintenance. And if we call them in, it's usually just for a software issue or a new setup or just something that's kind of out of the ordinary for us. But we also want to be able to integrate the AI and maybe further utilize MIS. We do have Avanti Slingshot that we're slowly implementing here at Polaris, and we want to be able to use that to provide better performance metrics, but also provide business intelligence to make better decisions, right? So I think it comes down to always trying to, Elisa was mentioning trying to be involved and just kind of understand what's out there. So you want to really just always keep in mind what's out there from suppliers and staying up to date on your technology. Since my time at Polaris, we've made a lot of investments on newer equipment, and some years we're trying to solve one problem. Some years we're trying to expand our capacity. So it really comes down to what your clients want, but also what additional problems can you solve with new investments.
Great. And so before we move to audience Q&A, I would like to finish the panel discussion with some advice. So starting with you, Lisa, for print service providers interested in reevaluating their workflow, where do you suggest they start?
I am the biggest proponent of workflow mapping. And I recently found out, because I always ask people, do you do this or have you done this? Walk your workflow. And people always say, yeah. But when I explained my experience with it, I realized in the discussions that followed that they didn't realize what I was talking about. And it turned into a very wonderful discussion with several customers. So if you think about your workflow from front to end, and that can be getting jobs into production, it could be adding variable, it could be anything in finishing, shipping, mail, whatever that might entail, it really means that you are looking at how things flow. I mentioned earlier that we've normalized what we do every day. So we think we're efficient, we're getting our jobs done, we're getting work out the door. But at the end of the day, how many times do I walk over to my copy printer? Or how many times does your pre-press person have to go talk to a CSR? How many times does your CSR have to go into production for something? How many times does your finishing operator have to go look for a job because it's not where it's supposed to be? Or how many times are you rushing to get something out the door because you had a bottleneck somewhere in your line? You can start small by just focusing on a certain area, but be honest. And what we did in my very first time that I ever did this, we put poster board all over a wall in a conference room. And we said, okay, we did the whole thing, but we said, okay, how does a job come in? And then what happens? And someone touches it and takes it over here. And then what happens? Oh, and then they go tell this person this. And then what happens? Oh, someone calls the customer. And then what? And we just did it. And when we got done, it was just this spaghetti mess. And it made me realize that I had no idea how inefficient I was. I had no idea how inefficient the workflow at the shop I was running was. And so then we were able to clearly say, okay, we're going to focus on whatever area would have the best value. If we solve this little thing and minimize these 3 touch points, we're going to gain 5% more throughput. So it was kind of a game at that point of where do we focus? But it's easier to take your workflow and break it into digestible pieces and then walk that workflow. What happens with each step? And again, being honest. And you need to get the input of the people that do it. It can't just be like me standing up saying, this is what I think happens. It has to be them actually explaining what they do step by step. And then when you see that, it becomes very clear that you're not as efficient as you thought. You understand truly where your touch points are. And then you can make a business decision of where you want to remove some of those touch points that you think will give the most value. And that could be anywhere in the chain. So it really is it's a fun thing to do. It's a little bit frustrating when you get the results because then you have that glaring thing in your face, but it does generally help. So that's what I always recommend to customers is just walk your workflow, look at what you got going on, and then decide where you're going to get the best value out of any changes that you make. It just makes it a little bit easier. And that could be removing software, adding software, changing processes, moving people around, whatever that ends up being. But then you'll at least know what you're doing and why you're doing it versus trying to guess, based off of what you think is going on.
Right, great. And James, from your perspective, what advice would you give to other print service providers looking to optimize their production workflows?
Absolutely. So as Lisa was mentioning, process, you always want to search for process improvement and as well as culture improvement as well too. So I certainly recommend spending time up front and thinking about your redundancies and searching for the right tools to do the job. But with that, you want to get your team involved, right? You want to see what challenges they have, and if there's something that we or people in my position aren't doing to support their team, you want to make sure it's a team effort, right? So if you're going to make a capital investment, you definitely want to do your homework ahead of time, engage in your suppliers, and you want to make sure you're fully utilizing whatever it is that you're looking to upgrade as far as workflows or automating. And you want to be able to solve as many problems as possible. So I think I mentioned this earlier, there's been times where we've made a purchase mainly to solve one problem, and then 6 months later we found out we can do X, Y, and Z after that. And it was like, oh my God, this is a home run. We can do so much more with this device. And again, I think it really just comes down to just working together with your team as much as possible. And as Lisa had mentioned, honesty, right? Honesty is key, especially when you're overseeing a whole group of people and overseeing multiple tiers within a department, such as supervisors and quality assurance and operators and lead operators. You're always going to have people who are mechanically inclined or technically inclined, right? And you want to find people who are in between. And it certainly takes dynamic people to be in this business. So you want to make sure you're utilizing employee skill sets and, once again, engaging with your team and just ensuring that you got the right fit for the right tool for the right job.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. So we do have a couple minutes left. I want to get to some of the audience questions that have come in. And a reminder to everyone, please submit your questions. Even if we don't get to them, we can always provide them to the team and they can follow up with you afterwards. So someone did ask in the beginning, back when we were talking about data. So Lisa, I'm gonna pitch this one to you. Someone asked, around data, one of the data points that seems hard to see is labor time around the job queue. They go on to explain a little bit, but then said, have you seen any solutions around this, seeing the labor time used?
I need to break, maybe this is something that I need to follow up on. So if I can get the person's name, I will definitely follow up. And why I say that is because the job queue to me, I don't know if that's print, finishing, or somewhere else. So I just want to make sure I'm tackling the right solution for the right area. If it's all of the above, there are some solutions, but definitely worth a follow-up conversation. And I will say that you all definitely should be demanding from your vendors that you work with, especially the print vendors and the finishing vendors, because most likely they do have a solution that will give you visibility to what jobs are in queue, how long they've been sitting there, how long they're taking to produce on that piece of equipment, what kind of issues or happened during that. So there's definitely solutions. It could be vendor specific. There's a few vendor agnostic solutions in out there too. So yeah, I would love to follow up and have a deeper conversation just to make sure I understand the true nature of the question.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So we did have a question that also just came in. James, if you could answer, this person asked, one of our bigger bottlenecks is pre-sorting and CAO. Can you speak more to the automation of that? How much human involvement do you still have?
So initially there was a lot more of a manual process. It took a few days, almost to a week, to do what we're doing now, whereas things are a little bit more automated down to just about 24 hours. We're using BCC as our postal pre-sort, and then we're utilizing the automation tools within those within the application. I would certainly recommend looking into, as I mentioned earlier, engaging with the supplier and seeing what sort of tools they can provide to help solve your problems. But again, there are automation functionalities that can help you out.
Great. Thank you for that. So a question came in you said for Rico, so Lisa. As G7 experts, what do you commonly find is the biggest problem uncertified shops face?
I would say uncertified not trained or uncertified trained, because I've worked for shops where we were G7 trained, but we never went through the certification because it costs money. So if you have uncertified, no training, the challenges you face are really trying to adapt to any production changes with the same job. If you have to reprint a job, if you have like maybe you're running a big job on an offset or a toner, whatever the platform is, and then you have 10 that get messed up in finishing and you need to rerun 10. You're going to run them potentially on a different platform. So I would say from lack of skills and lack of certification, you're going to run into those situations. I would say if you have skills, but you're just not certified, then it's just keeping up with what you know from a skill set. It's making sure that your profiles match the environment, the time of year, like I mentioned. If you have samples you have to match, can you print it on the same technology or not? So I think there's a difference between those two scenarios, but I would definitely say if you don't have the skills and you don't have the certification, you can definitely go outward, because there are people, even outside of Ricoh, there are people that specialize, literally that's all they do is color services for print shops. So just, if you have questions around that, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a deeper discussion.
Great. And I think we probably have time for one or two more questions. So a question did come up when we were talking about robotics and AI. And the person asked, with the changes in the technology and incorporation of robotics and AI, what skills should print experts focus on to stay relevant with industry changes? So maybe I'll start with you, James. How are you staying up to date on all of these changes and the decisions that you ultimately make?
So to stay up to date, we want to make sure we're not only running our job as efficiently as possible, but just staying in touch with, again, our suppliers, as well as attending conferences and trying to network as much as possible, and talking to other suppliers that can help us out. But I think as newer technology is evolving, we need to take a look at what we have, and are we producing our work the best way possible? Are we producing it with the most quality possible? And is there ways to better enhance what we're doing? So always just taking a look and seeing what's out there. Even as far as simple as, I mentioned earlier, we have a Ricoh 9210. Well, now Ricoh is offering the 9500 model and the 7500 model. So is there room for improvement, right? Our high-speed inkjet, we migrated to inkjet almost 10 years ago. There's plenty of devices out there now that can do much more than what we have. Do we need to migrate to these newer versions? Do we need to be looking at what we're doing and, once again, asking ourselves, how can we do this better?
Great. Lisa, how about you? What would you suggest to someone who wants to stay up to date on things like robotics and AI?
I would say there's a lot. So there's conventions, both vendor-led, peer group led. So I always recommend peer groups are great if you can find them, because you're dealing with your peers. You're not dealing with a salesperson potentially, and you can find out what they're using and what they've done. But from a vendor event perspective, there's like things like Printing United, Drupa, Hunkler Innovation Days. There's several Explore. There's tons of events, tons. There's even manufacturing events with robotics that are not print specific, but manufacturing specific. So again, tons of events. You just have to look out there and you will find them. And then I will always say is, if you have a vendor that you work with, a partner that you trust, always ask them, because it's part of our job, because I manage all of our software that we develop. It's part of our job to understand what's out there in the market that we're potentially competing against. So most likely your vendors are going to have some information for you, or they can direct you to where you should go look. And then I would say second would be peer groups, and then industry events. So
great, that's great advice. So we're pretty much out of time now. So there are some additional questions that we didn't get to, but James, Lisa, thank you so much for being on the webinar today. And with that, on behalf of Printing Impressions, In-Plan Impressions, and Ricoh, I want to personally thank you, James, thank you, Lisa, for speaking today. I also want to thank all of you, our audience, for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all of our archived and upcoming webinars. If you would all just take a moment to fill out the brief feedback survey on the next page, we will be very grateful. Your feedback will influence the webinars that we bring to you in the future. So I hope to see you all at the next Printing Impressions and Implant Impressions webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.